Commander Vextal had seen a lot in his 300 cycles of service to the Kolrathi Empire, but nothing prepared him for this moment. He stood on the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Sovereign Claw, watching the tactical display with growing confusion that bordered on panic. The humans were doing something impossible. "Status report," he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across 17 star systems. His tactical officer, a young Kolrathi named Genkor, looked up from his console with all 4 eyes wide. "Sir, the human fleet is maintaining position at Grid Sector 47 Alpha. They haven't moved in 6 hours. "That's not possible," Vextal said flatly. "We've been advancing at full combat speed. They should be attempting evasive maneuvers or preparing for engagement." "Yes, sir," Genkor agreed, his claws tapping nervously against his station. "But according to our sensors, they're just sitting there, waiting." Vextal turned to face the main view screen, where the human fleet appeared as small blue dots against the black of space. 12 ships total, facing down the might of 43 Kolrathi vessels. It was suicide, and humans weren't known for suicidal tactics. They were known for being annoying, persistent, and frustratingly clever. This was his first real engagement against Earth's forces. Before this, the Kolrathi had steamrolled through the outer colonies, claiming system after system with minimal resistance. The humans had retreated each time, saving their civilians and abandoning infrastructure rather than fight. Command had called them cowards. But Vextal had studied Earth's history during the journey here. He'd read about something humans called the Fabian strategy, about a general named Washington who won a war by refusing to lose it, about retreat being just another word for regrouping. He tried to warn the high command that humans might be more dangerous than they appeared. They'd laughed at him. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the human flagship." "Put it through," Vextal ordered. The view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. "Female," Vextal noted, with short dark hair and a scar running along her left cheek. She wore the uniform of an Earth Defense Force admiral, and her expression was calm, almost bored. "I'm Admiral Chen of the EDF Relentless," she said without preamble. "You're Commander Vextal, correct?" "I am," he replied, surprised she knew his name. "Have you contacted me to discuss terms of surrender?" Chen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, Commander. I'm calling to give you a chance to retreat. Turn your fleet around, leave this system, and we'll let you go. This is your only warning." Behind him, Vextal heard several of his bridge crew make sounds of disbelief and anger. He raised one hand for silence. "Admiral, you are outnumbered nearly 4 to 1. Your ships are smaller and your weapons less powerful than ours. What makes you think you're in a position to make demands?" "Because we know something you don't," Chen said simply. "We've been waiting for you to get this far into the gravity well. You're committed now. If you try to run, it'll take you 8 hours to reach minimum safe jump distance. We can end this in 3. "End this how, exactly?" Vextal asked, genuinely curious now. The human admiral seemed too confident for someone facing such overwhelming odds. "You ever heard of quantum entanglement, Commander?" Vextal had, of course. It was basic physics, the foundation of faster-than-light communication. Paired particles that remained connected regardless of distance, allowing instantaneous transmission of information. Every spacefaring race used it. "Of course," he said. "What about weaponized quantum entanglement?" Chen asked. Vextal felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would be impossible using conventional power sources." "Yes," Chen interrupted. "But we don't use conventional power sources anymore, Commander. Haven't for about 15 years now. See, humans have this weird habit of taking theoretical physics and asking, but what if we actually built it? We had this physicist back in 2187, Dr. Sarah Kowalski, who figured out how to create stable microsingularities. Took her team another decade to weaponize it, but well, here we are." She leaned forward, and Vextal saw something in her expression that made him want to order an immediate retreat. "We've spent the last 6 hours establishing quantum locks on every single ship in your fleet," Chen continued. Right now, you've got maybe 3,000 entangled particles attached to your hull, invisible to your sensors, impossible to remove. And every single one of them is paired with a particle inside a microsingularity containment field. You're bluffing, Vextal said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Chen gestured off-screen, and a moment later, one of the Kilrathi escort frigates on Vextal's tactical display simply vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone. Where it had been, space itself seemed to fold inward for a fraction of a second before normalizing. The bridge erupted in chaos. Alarms screamed, officers shouted, and Vextal's tactical display lit up with warnings he'd never seen before. What did you do? He demanded. Collapse the quantum field around that ship, Chen explained calmly. Everything inside the affected area gets pulled through the event horizon of a microsingularity. The ship, the crew, even the light itself. Takes about 0.03 seconds from initiation to completion. Nobody suffers if that makes you feel better. You murdered 300 people, Vextal said, his voice shaking with rage. I demonstrated our capabilities, Chen corrected. And I did it on your smallest ship to minimize casualties. I could have picked your flagship, Commander. I still can. You've got 42 ships left. I can make them all disappear before your gunners even get a target lock. Or you can turn around and leave. Your choice. You've got 60 seconds to decide. The transmission cut off. Vextal stood frozen, mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Weapons that could simply erase ships from existence? It violated every principle of warfare he'd ever learned. There was supposed to be an exchange of fire, shields, and armor protecting both sides, a test of firepower and tactical skill. This wasn't war, it was execution. Sir, what are your orders? Genkor asked quietly. What could he order? An attack would be suicide, Chen had made that clear. But retreat meant admitting defeat without firing a shot, meant confirming that humanity possessed weapons beyond the Kilrathi's ability to counter. Command would never believe it. They'd call him a coward, strip him of rank, possibly execute him for dereliction of duty. But his crew would be alive. Helm, he said finally, his voice heavy. Come about. Set course for the jump point, maximum speed. Sir, the High Command, one of his officers began. Can court-martial me when we get home, Vextal interrupted. I won't sacrifice this fleet for pride. Helm, execute. The Sovereign Claw began to turn, and the rest of the fleet followed. As they accelerated away from the human ships, Vextal pulled up the sensor logs from the moment that frigate had disappeared. He needed to understand what had happened, needed evidence to show command. What he saw made no sense. The readings showed a localized gravitational anomaly that appeared exactly where the frigate had been, spiking to levels that should have been detectable light years away but somehow remained contained to a sphere less than a kilometer in diameter. The math didn't work. The physics didn't work. Unless the humans had found a way to manipulate space-time itself at the quantum level. Sir, his science officer called out. I'm detecting gravitational fluctuations throughout the fleet. Microgravity pulses, barely detectable but definitely there. The quantum particles Chen mentioned, Vextal said. They're attached to all our ships. It appears so, sir. I'm reading approximately 2,900 individual sources per vessel. If the humans can trigger them remotely, they can erase our entire fleet whenever they choose, Vextal finished. Noted. Continue monitoring. Let me know if the signature changes. The journey to the jump point took 8 hours, just as Chen had said. 8 hours of waiting for the sky to collapse around them, 8 hours of knowing that human weapons were attached to every ship and there was nothing they could do about it. Some of his officers suggested trying to scrub the hull, flush the ships with electromagnetic pulses, anything to remove the quantum particles. Vextal forbade it. If Chen wanted them dead, they'd already be dead. The humans were making a point, demonstrating not just their capability but their restraint. They could have destroyed the entire fleet but chose to let them retreat. That said something about human psychology that troubled him almost as much as their weapons technology. They reached the jump point without incident. As the Sovereign Claw prepared to enter hyperspace, Vextal received one final transmission from Admiral Chen. "Have a safe trip home, Commander," she said. "And give your superiors a message from me. We've been developing weapons like this for decades while you've been fighting conventional wars. We've got stuff in development that makes quantum singularity weapons look primitive. If you want to keep this conflict going, we'll accommodate you. But it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Maybe think about whether conquest is really worth it." The transmission ended, and the Sovereign Claw jumped. The High Command didn't believe him at first. They demanded proof, called his sensor logs fabricated, accused him of cowardice and conspiracy. It wasn't until the Second Fleet was dispatched and suffered the same fate that they started to take his warnings seriously. But by then, humans had already demonstrated something else. The Kilrathi had assumed that quantum weapons were humanity's ace in the hole, their secret advantage. They were wrong. The quantum weapons were just the opening move. 3 weeks after Vextal's retreat, Earth's forces launched what they called Operation Oversight. Vextal, now under house arrest pending his court-martial, watched the reports come in with growing horror. Human ships had appeared simultaneously in 17 different Kilrathi-controlled systems. Not through hyperspace jumps, which required ships to enter and exit at specific points. These ships had simply appeared in orbit around major colonies, emerging from what human scientists were calling quantum tunnels. Each ship carried the same message: evacuate your civilians within 72 hours or face consequences. The Kilrathi High Command, outraged at the ultimatum, refused. They sent defense fleets to each system, prepared to teach these upstart humans a lesson about respect. The humans made good on their threat. But they didn't attack the colonies directly. Instead, they targeted something the Kilrathi hadn't considered valuable enough to defend. They went after the stars. Vextal watched the footage from the Kelrath system, one of the oldest Kilrathi colonies. The human ship, a massive vessel called the EDF Prometheus, had positioned itself between the system's star and its inhabited planets. Then it had deployed something the humans called a stellar lens array. Within 6 hours, the temperature on Kelrath Prime had dropped by 15 degrees. Within 24 hours, the planet was experiencing the equivalent of a nuclear winter. The star's light and heat were being refracted, bent around the planet by a web of quantum fields generated by the Prometheus. The humans weren't attacking the colony. They were putting it in shadow, slowly freezing it to death. And they were doing this in 17 systems at once. The Kilrathi had 2 choices: evacuate billions of civilians or watch them freeze. Pride warred with practicality in the halls of the High Command, but in the end, survival instincts won. They began the largest evacuation in Kilrathi history. It took 6 months. 6 months of humans patiently maintaining their stellar blockades, allowing supply ships through but nothing else. 6 months of the mighty Kilrathi Empire admitting that they couldn't protect their own people from an enemy that could manipulate the very fabric of space. Vextal's court-martial was quietly dropped. Instead, he was promoted and assigned to the newly formed Human Studies Division, tasked with understanding how Earth had leapfrogged the rest of the galaxy in weapons technology. What he discovered terrified him more than the weapons themselves. Humans hadn't stumbled onto these technologies by accident. They'd pursued them deliberately, methodically, with the kind of long-term planning that most species couldn't maintain across multiple generations. While the Kilrathi and other powers had focused on incremental improvements to existing weapons systems, humans had gone back to fundamental physics and asked dangerous questions. What if we could weaponize gravity? What if we could move ships without using hyperspace? What if we could target individual particles across light years? What if we could turn stars off? They'd ask these questions and then they'd spent decades answering them. Not because they needed to, not because they were at war, but because humans seemed constitutionally incapable of seeing a theoretical possibility and not trying to make it real. Vextal found records of human scientists working on quantum entanglement weapons dating back 70 years, decades before humanity had even encountered another spacefaring race. They developed these technologies in peacetime, just in case they ever needed them. The implications were staggering. If humans had been working on this stuff for 70 years, what else did they have in development? What other impossible weapons were sitting in research facilities across human space, waiting for the right moment to be deployed? He compiled his findings into a report for the High Command. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity didn't just control advanced weapons technology. They controlled the fundamental forces of the universe in ways no other race had even conceptualized. And they kept it secret until they needed it. The peace talks began 3 months later. The Kolrathi Empire, facing the prospect of having every star in their territory turned into a weapon against them, sued for peace. The terms were harsh but fair. All occupied human colonies returned, reparations paid, and an agreement that neither side would engage in hostilities for at least 50 standard years. Humanity agreed, but with one condition. They wanted to establish joint research stations, places where human and Kolrathi scientists could work together on advancing theoretical physics. The High Command was suspicious at first. Why would the humans share their technological advantages? What was the catch? Vextal understood before most. Humans weren't offering to share their weapons technology. They were offering to share their approach to science, their willingness to ask impossible questions and pursue impossible answers. They wanted to teach the Kolrathi how to think like humans. It was the most terrifying peace offer Vextal had ever heard, because it meant humans were confident enough in their technological superiority that they could afford to help their enemies catch up. They knew that by the time the Kolrathi mastered quantum weaponry, humans would have moved on to something even more advanced. The first joint research station opened 2 years after the peace treaty. Vextal attended the ceremony as part of the Kolrathi delegation. He watched human and Kolrathi scientists greeting each other, sharing data, beginning collaborative projects on things like quantum computing and stellar engineering. Admiral Chen was there too, retired now but still influential in human military circles. Vextal approached her during the reception, curiosity finally overcoming his nervousness. "Admiral," he said, "I have to ask, why did you only destroy one of my ships? You could have wiped out my entire fleet in seconds." Chen turned to face him, and he saw that same calculating look she'd had during their first confrontation. "Because war isn't about killing the most people, Commander," she said. "It's about achieving objectives. Our objective was to end the conflict with minimal casualties on both sides. Destroying one ship demonstrated our capability. Destroying your whole fleet would have just made martyrs and guaranteed continued fighting. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one you don't use." "But you evacuated 17 colonies," Vextal pointed out. "Billions of people displaced. Was that really necessary?" "Absolutely," Chen replied without hesitation. "We needed to prove we could reach any system in your empire, that nowhere was safe. But we also needed to prove we weren't monsters. We gave you time to evacuate. We could have just started freezing planets with people still on them, but we didn't. We showed you we had the capability and the restraint. That's what ended the war, Commander. Not fear, but respect." She took a sip of her drink, then continued. "You want to know the real secret of human warfare? It's not the weapons. It's understanding that war is just politics by other means. The goal is never to destroy your enemy, it's to make them stop being your enemy. Everything else is just tools to achieve that end." Vextal considered this. So the quantum weapons, the stellar blockades, all of it was just demonstration? Demonstration, yes, but real demonstration, Chen clarified. "We weren't bluffing. We could have done everything we threatened and more. But we also knew that if we did, we'd create an enemy that would never stop fighting us. Better to show overwhelming power and then offer a reasonable peace. Give your opponent a way to surrender with dignity intact." "And the research stations?" Vextal asked. "Sharing technology with former enemies?" Chen smiled. "That's just enlightened self-interest, Commander. The universe is a big place. There are probably threats out there we haven't encountered yet. Better to have allies who can hold their own than enemies who'll need rescuing. Besides, teaching you our science benefits us too. More minds working on problems means faster solutions. Maybe one of your scientists will figure out something we missed." "You're very confident we won't use what we learn against you," Vextal observed. "We are," Chen agreed. "Because we'll always be at least one generation ahead. That's the thing about humans, Commander. We never stop asking questions. By the time you've mastered what we teach you, will have already moved on to the next impossible thing. She glanced around the room at the scientists from both species collaborating enthusiastically. That's the real weapon, Chen said quietly. Not the quantum bombs or stellar lenses. It's our refusal to accept that something can't be done. You know what the first thing a human says when told something is impossible? What? Vextal asked. Hold my beer and watch this, Chen replied with a grin. That attitude has gotten us into a lot of trouble over the years, but it's also taken us to places no other species has dared to go. Into the heart of stars, into the quantum foam, into the spaces between spaces. We don't just push boundaries, Commander. We erase them and redraw the map. Vextal thought about this for a long moment. He thought about the frigate that had vanished in an instant, about colonies evacuated under frozen stars, about human scientists working 70 years on weapons they might never use. He thought about a species that turned theoretical physics into practical warfare and then offered to teach their enemies how to do the same. I'm glad we're at peace, he said finally. So are we, Chen replied. War is expensive and wasteful. Peace is much more productive. Plus, now we can work together on the really interesting problems. Like what? Chen's grin widened. Well, we've been running into some weird readings at the edge of the galaxy. Gravitational anomalies that don't match any known phenomena. Could be nothing, could be a natural occurrence we haven't cataloged yet, or it could be something else entirely. Something else? Vextal asked, not sure he wanted to know. Another species, maybe. One that's been out there longer than any of us, watching and waiting. Or maybe something stranger than that. That's the beauty of the universe, Commander. There's always another mystery to solve, another impossible thing to attempt. She raised her glass. To impossible things. Vextal raised his own glass and clinked it against hers. To impossible things, he echoed. As he drank, he realized something that would have seemed absurd just a few years ago. He was looking forward to working with humans, to learning how they thought, how they approached problems that other species deemed unsolvable. Because if humanity could weaponize quantum mechanics and turn stars into tactical assets, what else might they accomplish? And more importantly, what would the galaxy look like when they did? The possibilities were endless, and for the first time since encountering humanity, Vextal found that thought exciting rather than terrifying. 20 years had passed since the Kilrathi War ended, and the galaxy looked very different. Dr. Melissa Torres stood in the observation deck of Research Station Kepler 9, watching a star die in real time. Well, not exactly die, but change in ways that should have taken millions of years. The human Kilrathi scientific team had been working on controlled stellar evolution for 3 years now, and they were finally seeing results. Initiating Phase 3, announced Jen Kor, now a respected astrophysicist rather than a nervous tactical officer. His claws danced across the holographic controls with practiced ease. Quantum field matrices are stable. Fusion rate decreasing by 0.03% per minute. Torres watched the star on the main display as it shifted from bright yellow to a deeper orange. They were forcing it through its life cycle, compressing millions of years of natural evolution into weeks. Not to weaponize it this time, but to understand the fundamental processes that govern stellar mechanics. Beautiful, she murmured. The quantum lattice is holding perfectly. Jen, you were right about the secondary harmonics. The Kilrathi scientist's expression showed what Torres had learned to recognize as pleasure. It was your initial framework that made it possible, Doctor. I merely refined the mathematics. This was how most conversations between human and alien scientists went these days. Collaborative, respectful, focused on pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The joint research stations had become the most productive scientific institutions in known space, churning out discoveries at a rate that astonished everyone. But Torres knew the real reason for all this cooperation, and it wasn't just scientific curiosity. Humans had encountered something that scared them. The gravity anomalies Admiral Chen had mentioned 20 years ago had turned out to be exactly what everyone had feared, evidence of another species. One that made humanity's technological achievements look primitive. They called themselves the architects, and they'd been watching the younger races of the galaxy for a very long time. The first contact had happened 5 years ago, when a human exploration vessel discovered what appeared to be a massive structure orbiting a neutron star. Not a space station or a ship, but something that defied classification. It was the size of a planet, made from materials that shouldn't exist, and it had been there for at least 10,000 years. When the exploration team tried to scan it, the structure woke up. Torres had seen the recordings. She'd watched as the architect installation activated, as beings that looked like living geometry materialized on the bridge of the human ship, as they communicated directly into the minds of the crew without using any technology anyone could detect. The architect's message had been simple and terrifying. The younger races of the galaxy were approaching a critical threshold. They were developing technologies that could damage the fundamental structure of space-time itself, and if they continued unchecked, they would eventually unravel reality. Humanity's quantum weapons, their stellar manipulation technology, their ability to create and control microsingularities, all of it was pushing the boundaries of what the universe could safely tolerate. The architects had let the younger races play with physics for millennia, waiting to see if any would develop wisdom alongside power. Most species never reached the critical threshold. They destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse before their technology became dangerous. But humanity, with their relentless curiosity and refusal to accept limitations, had hit that threshold in less than a century of spaceflight. The architects gave humanity a choice: stop advancing certain technologies, or learn to use them responsibly under architect supervision. It wasn't quite an ultimatum, but it wasn't exactly a friendly offer either. That's when everything changed. The human response had surprised everyone, including the architects themselves. Instead of reacting with fear or defiance, humanity's leadership had asked a simple question: can you teach us how to use these technologies safely? The architects hadn't expected that. Most species either tried to fight them or retreated in terror. But humans, characteristically, saw an opportunity to learn from beings millions of years more advanced. Thus began the strangest period in human history. The architects agreed to mentor humanity, but with conditions. Humans couldn't work alone anymore. They had to bring the other species of the galaxy along, share their knowledge, collaborate on solutions. The architects didn't want humanity to become a second architect civilization. They wanted humanity to elevate everyone. So humans had opened their research to the galaxy. The quantum weapons technology, the stellar manipulation systems, the dimensional folding drives that were still in development, all of it became collaborative projects. Research stations like Kepler-9 sprang up across known space, staffed by scientists from dozens of different species. And it was working. The combined intellectual power of multiple species working together was achieving things none could have managed alone. Humans brought their aggressive creativity and willingness to take risks. Korathi brought their mathematical precision and patience. The insectoid Vresh contributed their understanding of emergent systems. The crystalline youth car offered insights into quantum mechanics from their fundamentally different way of perceiving reality. But Torres knew the real reason behind all this cooperation. Everyone was scared. Scared of what the architects might do if the younger races didn't prove themselves worthy. Scared of what would happen when the next impossible technology emerged. Scared of humanity's seemingly limitless ability to turn theoretical physics into practical applications. Dr. Torres, Gen Core interrupted her thoughts. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It's marked as Alpha-level security. Torres felt her stomach drop. Alpha-level meant something big, usually bad. She pulled up the transmission on her private console, entering her security credentials. The message was from Admiral Sarah Chen, who now served as the head of Earth's Strategic Defense Initiative. Despite her retirement from active service, Chen remained one of the most influential voices in human military planning. Melissa, Chen's recorded message began. We have a situation. 3 days ago, an architect installation at the galactic rim went dark. Completely offline, no response to any communication. We sent a probe, and what we found is being classified at the highest level. I need you and your team to drop everything and report to Outpost Prometheus immediately. Bring Gen Core and anyone else you trust. This is bigger than the Stellar Evolution Project. The message ended with a set of coordinates and a security clearance upgrade that gave Torres access to files she'd never seen before. "Jen," she said slowly, "pack your research. We're leaving. The Stellar Project. We'll have to wait. This is a direct order from Earth Strategic Command." The Korathi scientist knew better than to argue when humans used that tone. They were on a fast transport to Outpost Prometheus within the hour. The journey took 2 days through quantum tunnels, the same technology that had allowed human ships to appear instantly across Korathi space during the war. Torres spent the time reading the classified files her new clearance had unlocked, and what she learned kept her awake both nights. The architects weren't a unified species. They were more like a collective consciousness spread across thousands of installations throughout the galaxy, each one connected through quantum entanglement to the others. They shared information instantaneously, made decisions collectively, and acted as one. Or at least they had. Until 3 days ago. The installation that went dark, designated Architect Station Omega, had been one of the oldest and largest. It had existed for over 1 million years, watching over a region of space that included 17 inhabited systems. And now it was silent. Worse, the probe Earth had sent showed damage. Something had attacked the station, something powerful enough to breach Architect defenses that humanity couldn't even begin to understand, let alone replicate. When Torres arrived at Outpost Prometheus, she found Admiral Chen waiting with a team of scientists and military officials from across the galaxy. The outpost was a massive structure, built around one of humanity's experimental stellar core reactors. It could power weapons capable of destroying planets, or research equipment capable of peering into the quantum foam itself. Right now, it was being used for something else entirely. "Dr. Torres, welcome," Chen greeted her. "I see you've read the briefing materials." "What I could understand of them, yes," Torres replied. "Admiral, what could possibly damage an Architect station? Their technology is millions of years ahead of ours." "That's the question everyone's asking," Chen said grimly. "Come with me. We've got something to show you." She led Torres and Gencor to a secure laboratory deep inside the outpost. Inside, floating in a containment field, was a fragment of something that hurt to look at. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its surface shifting between states of matter that shouldn't be possible. "This was recovered from the debris field around Station Omega," Chen explained. "Our analysis suggests it's a weapon fragment, something designed to disrupt quantum coherence on a massive scale. It's not like anything in the Architect database, which means there's another player in the galaxy," Torres finished. "Someone even more advanced than the Architects. Or someone just as advanced but with very different priorities," Chen corrected. "The Architects built their stations to observe and occasionally intervene. This weapon was built to destroy. Completely different philosophy." Gencor approached the containment field cautiously, his 4 eyes studying the fragment from multiple angles. "Admiral, have the Architects responded to this attack? Surely they would defend themselves." "That's the other problem," Chen said. "We've been trying to contact the Architect Collective for 3 days. No response. It's like they've gone into hiding, or worse, they're too damaged to communicate." "Worse how?" Torres asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The collective consciousness was connected through quantum entanglement," Chen said. "If something disrupted that connection, if this weapon damaged the quantum links between installations, the Architects might be experiencing something like brain damage on a civilization-wide scale. They could be trying to process what happened, trying to restore their network, or they could be completely fragmented. Leaving us on our own to face whatever did this," Torres said quietly. "Exactly." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. For 20 years, humanity and the other younger races had operated under the protective umbrella of the Architects. They'd known there was a more advanced civilization watching over them, ready to intervene if things got too dangerous. It had been terrifying and reassuring in equal measure. Now that protection might be gone. "So what's the plan?" Torres asked. Chen smiled, and Torres saw the same expression she'd worn when facing down the Korathi fleet 20 years ago. Calm, calculating, and absolutely certain. We do what humans do best, Chen said. We figure out the impossible. We've got every major scientific institution in the galaxy working on this. We're analyzing the weapon fragment, back-engineering architect technology, developing countermeasures for weapons we don't understand. And we're preparing for the possibility that whoever did this might come for us next. Admiral, we barely understand our own quantum weapons, Gencor protested. How are we supposed to defend against something that can damage the architects? The same way humanity has handled every impossible challenge, Chen replied. We'll learn fast, adapt faster, and probably try a bunch of things that shouldn't work until we find something that does. It's not elegant, but it's effective. She pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy. Hundreds of points were marked in blue, representing the various research stations and defense installations that had been established over the past 20 years. We've been preparing for this without knowing it, Chen continued. All those joint research projects, all that shared technology, all those collaborative experiments, they've created a network of scientific and military cooperation that spans the entire galaxy. Humanity, Kolrathi, Vresh, Youthkar, and 24 other species all working together. That's our advantage. Against an enemy that can destroy architect stations? Torres asked skeptically. Against any enemy, Chen said firmly. Look, the architects were incredibly advanced, but they worked alone. They had millions of years of knowledge but only their own perspective. We've got dozens of different species, each one thinking about problems in fundamentally different ways. The architects thought in terms of stability and observation. We think in terms of adaptation and innovation. She zoomed the display in on the sector where Station Omega had been destroyed. The weapon fragment you saw, our analysis suggests it works by creating cascading quantum decoherence. It unravels quantum entanglement on a massive scale, which is devastating to the architects because their entire civilization is based on quantum links. But you know what's not based on quantum links? Our alliance. We use quantum communication, sure, but our cooperation is based on physical presence, on individuals from different species working face to face. We're messy and inefficient compared to the architects, but we're also much harder to disrupt. Torres considered this. You think our diversity is a defense mechanism? I think our diversity is our strength, Chen replied. The architects optimized for efficiency and became vulnerable to anything that disrupted their network. We're optimized for nothing in particular, we just have a lot of different people trying a lot of different approaches. Some will fail, but others will succeed. That's how evolution works, and that's how we're going to survive this. Over the next 6 months, the galaxy mobilized in ways it never had before. Research stations shifted focus to defensive technologies. Military installations were upgraded with the latest weapons systems. And scientists from every species worked around the clock to understand the threat they faced. Torres led one of the primary research teams, focused on developing countermeasures to quantum decoherence weapons. It was frustrating work. Every time they thought they'd found a solution, further testing revealed flaws. The weapon fragment from Station Omega was sophisticated beyond anything they'd encountered, designed by minds that understood physics at levels the younger races couldn't match. But slowly, painfully, they made progress. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A Youthkar physicist named Crystalline Thought proposed an approach that seemed nonsensical at first. Instead of trying to shield against quantum decoherence, why not embrace it? Design systems that could function even when quantum coherence was disrupted, that didn't rely on entanglement to operate. It meant giving up some of the advantages of quantum technology, reverting to more classical physics in some applications. For most species, this would have seemed like a step backward. But humans, characteristically, saw the potential. It's like the old military strategy of redundancy, Torres explained to her team. We build systems that can operate in multiple modes. Quantum when it's available, classical when it's not. Sure, we lose some efficiency, but we gain resilience. The hybrid systems they developed weren't as elegant as pure quantum technology, but they worked. Ships were retrofitted with both quantum and classical sensors. Communication networks were given backup channels that didn't rely on entanglement. Weapons systems were designed to function across a spectrum of physical principles. It was messy and complicated, exactly the kind of inelegant solution that drove perfectionist species crazy. But it worked. And then 8 months after Station Omega went dark, the architects finally responded. The message came through every available channel simultaneously, overwhelming communication networks across the galaxy. It was brief and urgent. They're coming. Prepare. That was all. No explanation, no detailed warning, nothing to indicate who they were or when they might arrive. The architects, it seemed, were still too damaged to provide detailed information. But 3 days later, sensors at the galactic rim detected something emerging from the void between galaxies. Ships, thousands of them, traveling faster than anything the younger races or even the architects had achieved. They weren't using hyperspace or quantum tunnels. They were moving through normal space at velocities that should have been impossible, somehow bypassing the light-speed barrier through methods no one could detect. The invasion had begun. Admiral Chun called an emergency council of every major military and scientific leader in the galaxy. Torres attended via holographic link, along with representatives from every species. The tension in the virtual meeting space was palpable. "We've been analyzing the incoming fleet," Chin began without preamble. "Based on their current trajectory and velocity, they'll reach the outer systems in 6 weeks. We have that long to prepare." "Prepare how?" demanded a Kolrathi admiral. "We don't know what weapons they have, what defenses they possess, or even what they want." "We know they're hostile," Chin replied. "They destroyed an architect station. That tells us everything we need to know about their intentions. As for preparation, we use what we've learned over the past 8 months. Hybrid systems, distributed defense networks, and every weapon in our arsenal." "Including the quantum weapons?" asked a Vresh military coordinator. "Including everything," Chin confirmed. "Quantum singularity bombs, stellar manipulation arrays, dimensional folding drives, all of it. We're going to throw every piece of impossible technology we've got at them and see what sticks." "And if nothing works?" someone asked. Chen's expression didn't change. "Then we learn from our failures and try something else. That's what we do. That's what we've always done." The 6 weeks before the invasion fleet arrived were the most intense period of preparation the galaxy had ever seen. Defense stations were established at strategic points. Fleets from dozens of different species coordinated their movements for the first time in history. And scientists worked to weaponize every discovery made over the past 2 decades. Torres found herself leading the development of what humans were calling the coherence bomb. It was based on the inverse principle of the weapon that had damaged Station Omega. Instead of creating decoherence, it would force quantum coherence on matter, locking particles into entangled states whether they wanted to be or not. The theory suggested it would freeze whatever it hit in a kind of quantum stasis, unable to change or move. The first test was promising. The second test accidentally created a localized time dilation field that aged the test ship by 300 years in subjective time while only seconds passed outside. The third test worked perfectly. "It's not elegant," Torres admitted to Gencor as they reviewed the results. "And there's about a dozen ways it could backfire catastrophically. But if it works on the invasion fleet, we might have a chance," Gencor finished. "Doctor, I have to ask. Are you scared?" Torres thought about lying, about maintaining the confident facade that seemed expected of her. But Gencor had been her friend and colleague for 2 decades. He deserved honesty. "Terrified," she admitted. "We're about to face an enemy that treats architect technology as target practice. Everything we've built, everything we've achieved, might not be enough. But you're going to try anyway," Gencor said. It wasn't a question. "Of course," Torres replied. "Because that's what humans do. We see something impossible and we try to make it work. We fail more often than we succeed, but we only need to succeed once." The invasion fleet arrived right on schedule, emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kelrath system. Thousands of ships, each one radiating energy signatures that made architect technology look primitive. The battle began immediately. The defenders opened with conventional weapons, testing the enemy's defenses. The results were discouraging. Energy weapons were absorbed by shields that seemed to violate thermodynamics. Kinetic weapons were deflected by gravity fields. Even nuclear warheads were neutralized before they could detonate. So humanity deployed its quantum arsenal. Singularity bombs created localized black holes that sucked in enemy ships, but the invaders simply phased out of normal space, existing in dimensions the bombs couldn't reach. Stellar lens arrays were deployed, attempting to focus starlight into cutting beams, but the enemy shields adapted almost instantly. Torres watched from Research Station Kepler 9, now serving as a command and coordination center. The battle was going poorly. Every weapon the defenders deployed was countered within minutes. The enemy was learning faster than anyone could adapt. Admiral Chin, Torres called through the command channel. Permission to deploy the coherence bomb. Denied, Chin replied immediately. We don't know enough about how it will interact with their technology. The time dilation effect from the second test could be our only chance, Torres interrupted. Admiral, everything else is failing. We need to try something they won't expect, something that doesn't fit conventional warfare paradigms. There was a long pause. Torres could almost see Chen weighing the risks, calculating probabilities, making the kind of impossible decision that defined leadership. Approved, Chen said finally. Target the lead ship in the invasion fleet. If it works, we deploy across the line. If it backfires, fall back to secondary defensive positions and we'll try something else. Torres initiated the firing sequence personally. The coherence bomb launched from one of the defense platforms, a cylinder of exotic matter wrapped in quantum field generators. It accelerated to near light speed in seconds, crossing the distance to the lead invasion ship in less than a minute. And then it detonated. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Quantum coherence radiated outward from the detonation point, forcing every particle it touched into entangled states. The lead ship froze, not destroyed but locked in place, every atom connected to every other atom in a web of quantum links that prevented any change. But something else happened too. The forced coherence created feedback, energy cascading through the quantum web. The frozen ship began to glow, brighter and brighter, as the quantum bonds struggled to contain the energy. It's going to explode, Genkor said, watching the readings. No, Torres corrected, her eyes wide with realization. It's going to implode. The quantum coherence is creating a stable state, but it's also creating infinite quantum pressure. The ship is collapsing into a lower energy state. The lead invasion ship vanished, not destroyed but transformed. Where it had been, there was now a perfectly spherical object about a meter in diameter, glowing with soft blue light. The quantum coherence had compressed the entire ship and everything in it down to a quantum-locked sphere. Did we just miniaturize an enemy dreadnought? Chen asked over the command channel. Apparently, Torres replied, still stunned. Well then, Chen said, and Torres could hear the smile in her voice. Let's make more of those. All ships, new targeting priority. Coherence bombs are cleared for deployment. The battle turned.